I'm here with Richard Anderson, very excited. He is the author of Outbound, Islands in the Void. Now, he's not just an author, mind you. He holds a master's degree in microbiology. He's operated in a clinical laboratory, but this book is a little bit of a departure for him. This is a science fiction novel that's based on a character named Virgil, the adventures he goes through, because in this novel, the Earth has become partially uninhabitable. And what Richard explores is the possibility of humans living in space. Richard, tell us a little bit about this. And you're on to chapter 2, the new version, where it's Meta Mars. You're going to Mars now that you've established this universe, correct?
Yes, that's right. And I do have a preliminary cover for that book.
We'd love to see that.
Shows a space ladder.
That's very cool. That's really actually a great cover, very captivating. Who does your cover art for you?
So that is Tim Kemerow, and he's doing. He did the cover of the Outbound, the first Outbound book.
Okay.
And the internal art. So he's doing some more art for me. The back of the cover shows something like twirl towers. It's something I invented for a colony on Mars.
Yeah. Oh, that's great, man. So tell me, it's got to be challenging. I'm a little bit of a writer. My mom was a writer my whole life. And, I'm also a science fan. And I have a small science fiction piece I wrote a few years ago. And, man, what a balance it is to try to keep the story moving and still keep the science in it. How do you balance that equation of using real science but keeping the story moving?
It's not easy, I can tell you that. One of the issues that I have when the book is finished is it's a bit disorganized because I don't follow an outline. I kind of lay out the science problems and see where they take me, what solutions I can offer, overlay characters, and then it doesn't necessarily line up chronologically at the end. So then it means going back and fixing all this stuff.
Right.
But I think the process is it's almost self-directed. I don't know where I'm going to end up when I start.
You don't have any idea, really?
Well, I do, but I'm not sure. Sometimes I take a detour, and the ending may be different than I first conceived.
Right. How long have you been writing in general?
I was practicing writing just as kind of a hobby before I retired. That's been 15 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I wasn't really doing anything serious until the COVID lockdown, and then I thought, well, now's
the time to shine.
Distractions.
Yeah, no, not a lot of distractions then. Who are some authors who you might say textured your influence in writing? Who do you admire?
Yeah, I got a lot from Isaac Asimov, but he had that was one of my early authors that I followed.
Amazing science fiction author, yes.
So, but I also saw some weaknesses in his stories, and that was he didn't really spend a lot of time developing characters or developing interrelated storylines. And so I thought, well, he's selling books, and maybe I could improve on that. I don't know if I have, but he was an inspiration in his concepts, and also showed me that possibly there's some better writing out there. And then I collected a lot of classic science fiction books, which are on the shelf behind me.
Yeah. Isaac Asimov, one of the greatest science fiction writers of all time, certainly. How did it feel for you when your first science fiction book it goes onto the list and becomes a bestseller?
Well, that would be great. That certainly hasn't happened, but that would be great.
Yeah. How do you feel about the response from critics and from the readers of your book?
So far, yeah, I think the response from critics and readers has been great. When you walk into a bookstore, or the few that you can find,
Mm-hmm.
you're almost overwhelmed by what's out there, what's available. And then we're dealing with a culture too today that I don't believe reads as much as we did. There are a lot of distractions. There's a lot of sound bites out there and
You're right.
visual distractions. And even when I want to read a article online, there's so many ads in between that it's really hard to stay focused on what you're reading because it's supported by advertising. So yeah, there's some issues there.
Well, it is a soundbite world, and it is distracting. When I read books, I like to read actual books for that very reason because I want to be in that universe only, and nothing take me out of it. I feel like that's important to immerse yourself in the text that you're reading to be able to stay in the confines of the world.
Absolutely, and it's a reading. Getting engaged in a book is a great way to de-pressure from your daily life. Especially if you do it before you go to bed.
No, it absolutely is a nice way to kind of still yourself and thin out some of the things running around in your brain. So in Meta Mars, we've established what the baseline of everything was. So how does the adventure pick up and take off?
It's an attempt to develop the capacity to support a few 100,000 people on the planet. I know there's been stuff in the news about sending several million people up on Mars. Not going to happen. Not going to happen, and maybe ever. I don't know. So you need a huge support system to support animal life and human life in particular. And so the motivation was, how would you do that on Mars? You would cover Valles Marineris, which is a huge rift that runs along the equator of Mars. And it's about 4,000 kilometers long, and it's very wide and very deep. So we're roofing that over gradually and then closing space
Okay.
As it expands, we can develop agriculture, we can develop parks and natural habitats and so forth, and import people. So energy is a big problem. So I'm addressing how that would happen. It's also very difficult to land payloads on Mars. And so I built the space ladder.
Okay.
And that's, that helps to solve that problem. So that was kind of exciting because it took a little bit of research.
That's really interesting. I saw that it not far back, there was a report that they had discovered that water actually had existed on Mars. And, does that get incorporated in there, some of the more modern discoveries?
Yes, and I think the water, there could be liquid water actually deep underground and held liquid by the internal temperature of the planet. It's considered a dead planet in that it doesn't have plate tectonics and it doesn't have a molten center, but it does have heat, the heated creation of the planet. And so there could be liquid water, highly saline, a lot of salts dissolved in it, but that could be a source. And NASA and others are finding that there's evidence that there's quite a bit of water underground. Unlike the moon, there seems to be a lot on Mars.
Right. So when a book is labeled hard science fiction, I think of hard liquor, it's the strong stuff, but how does that translate in science fiction, Richard?
Well, it's not a light cocktail, right? Yeah. So When I say hard science fiction, first of all, there's a scientific basis I don't have transporters like the star. Uh,
No tribble showing up, nothing like that is what you're saying.
um, so I try to take science at its face and say what is technologically possible now, and what's conceivably possible in the future, and also what is maybe not science fact, but it's supported
By current trends and evidence.
it's plausible. It's science plausible,
Yeah.
and that you're stretching out into the future. So that's how I define it.
There are some people out there who I'm sure you're familiar with who label themselves as futurists. And do you think through your research and what you've done now that in some ways you kind of slipped into the futurist category a little bit?
I do, yeah, and there's a number of benefits to that. We face a world today that there's a lot of depressing things going on. So for me, I say, well, it's not going to get better before it gets worse. That's my opinion. As far as climate and society and what we're seeing today, I'm projecting that out into the future. So let's get beyond that and say, okay, assume we're in a recovery mode after our disaster, and build on that. That gives it a positive effect, a positive spin. So then we can, I can escape into that when I'm writing, and that's my escapism.
No, that's great. That's great. So, when you were writing this, you've got the science background, but how did you go, how did you make it compelling for the reader? What did you do? What techniques did you employ? How did you go about making sure what you were writing was not only, good science, but good, interesting, compelling storyline?
I think you have to occupy your story, and you have to pay attention to the leaves on the trees. You get down into very close contact with your characters. You develop a lot of themes based on dialogue rather than prose, and prose are necessary because dialogue takes a lot more time to get through something.
Sure.
So you have to pick the areas where you want to go to dialogue and develop concepts and develop characters. And a lot can be, and you describe maybe an intimate scene between two people or more, that maybe an emotional scene that will bring the reader into the story.
Right.
They are actually occupying the story with you. And then your characters, well, when I create dialogue, the first pass, I want to get the information, what they're talking about, what is accomplished by the discourse, as far as the story is concerned. Then I go back and I say, nobody would talk like that. It's too scientific, maybe.
Right.
Grammar and all that.
Right. Yeah. You have to make it match the lexicon and the feel of real people.
Right.
Not that scientists aren't real people, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So then you go back and you throw a few non sequiturs in there in the conversation. That's what happens.
Right.
And they may be related, but they appear to be a non sequitur. And you try to. Your grammar is a lot different. You think about how you speak and how people speak. And so that will also bring the reader into a more intimate relationship with the story.
Right. So, with the advent recently of what appear to be very close to humanoid robotics that are going on, as someone who studies science in the future, what do you think about where we're at? How close we are with robotics becoming a mainstream thing in homes and around the planet in general?
Well, I can speak. I speak quite in depth in this in Outbound Meta Mars. because and also in Islands in the Void, because I don't think we can succeed in space without robots, without intelligent robots. Now, I address sentient robots and Outbound Meta Mars, and that's interesting to develop. Will they be human-like or not? If they're self-aware, and I postulate that they will not be human. It will not be human-like intelligence. They may be self-aware, but they won't have the sensory input that humans have. They won't sense. Well, I have a robot who becomes an eniologist, becomes a sommelier, and he's very skilled at tasting wines.
Okay.
And so he dips a little rod from his mouth into the glass of wine. First, he sniffs it. He has sniffers on his fingertips.
Okay.
He sniffs the wine, swirls it, does the whole routine, and then he can grade the wine and everything. But he can't taste it.
Not really.
He can sense the acidity. He can sense the various chemicals and identify and know what the balance should be, but he can't taste it.
That's very interesting. Yeah. How much do you think that, science fiction of the past has influenced science of today? The Star Treks, the Star Wars, etc., the Isaac Asimovs. How has it influenced our current science and informed it?
I think a lot of science fiction has been written by scientists or people who are really interested in science. Even if it's toward fantasy, it's a venue where you can go and develop ideas that you couldn't do in ordinary society and ordinary situations. So you can identify a concept as you invent your setting, you invent your artifacts and technology. I think it's contributed a lot to technology. Mm-hmm. The flip phone or the cell phone came from Star Trek.
Obviously, yeah.
And I think Star Trek, actually my kids got me a big atlas on Star Trek one time. I still have it. And in there, they were saying the biggest challenge was trying to keep ahead of science.
Right, yeah, absolutely, because you're exploding in the revolution of science at that time frame. Is beginning to happen.
Yeah. So I can remember the flat screens when they came on and Star Trek, and you had it mounted on your desk, and then instantly later, everybody had flat screens and iPads.
Right.
So that was their challenge. So yes, I do think it's the creative edge of science.
Now, let me ask you a fun question here, because I have to imagine as someone who values science and who's as learned and educated in science as you are, that sometimes there has to be a movie you're watching and you go, come on, man, that's not going to do it. What movie from a science perspective really irks you?
There have been many. I would be remiss to try and list them, because most of them have something that's just blatantly, wrong, and it disturbs me because I want to see. I don't want to see science used in a way that is not representative.
Right.
And so there's a description in Andrew Wyer's The Martian. Mm-hmm. At the end of the book, he creates a problem and then he resolves it and shows how you would resolve it. Now, that's where you get into plausible science, because not everything he said in there would be really that possible or could be done exactly. But the idea was you create the problem and you use your knowledge and technology and science to solve it.
Right, to try to extrapolate something that would be, cohesive and sensible.
So there's the last scene in the movie and in the book when he's launching to link up with the Mars the shuttle ship that comes back for him, and he's trying to accelerate to match their speed. They're slingshotting around Mars,
Right.
and he can't quite make it. So he unbuckles. He's in a spacesuit, and he goes out of the spaceship, and he cuts his finger off of his glove, and uses the pressure in his suit, the atmospheric pressure in his suit, to give him that extra
That
little
push.
boost,
Yeah.
a little push to get up to the shuttle ship. Well, I read something by a physicist, and he said, he wouldn't have been able to control his trajectory with his finger. He says your center of mass is right around your rear end.
he would have had to put a hole in the butt to make that work right. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. So
that would have been a different movie then, wouldn't
it? It's a small thing, but it's kind of funny. When you think, he said he would have been all over the place trying to control his trajectory.
No, that is a funny take. My favorite, I don't dislike it. Actually, I really enjoyed the movie, but scientifically, I knew as soon as I started hearing them, man, this sounds a little off. And that was Armageddon with Bruce Willis, if you remember that movie.
Yeah, vaguely.
Yeah, that's the one where they slingshot around the moon to try to, land on the asteroid and blow it up before so it'll split in two and bypass the Earth. And, they drop a nuke on it. And, all of the science for the most part was just out, there was no grounding in reality, but it made for a fun movie, I guess.
Well, that's like the Star Wars movies. They are totally unrealistic. I mean, there's nothing in them that speaks of reality, but they do create a lot of interesting places and planets, and of course the graphics and the storyline are exciting. It's space cowboys,
right? Yeah, it was a Western in space. That's what he set out to make, right? A space opera that's a Western.
So I think they have value. Those movies are entertaining, and I think it's fun for people to pick them apart and say, this is what's wrong here, and this is what's wrong there, and they could have, so they may not be scientifically valid, but it does create a discourse, and it does create some thinking about, some imagination and thinking about these things.
Richard, if you were going to tell someone, who has not yet seen the Outbound series here, if you were going to give them, 30 seconds of why you want to read this book versus, as you mentioned earlier, everyone that's out there, as there are innumerable, what would you tell them?
Well, I would say this is a peek into a possible future. And it's very heavily involved with environmental problems and then the fallout from that. So we evolved in such a way that we live in the present, and we don't a lot of times look forward into the future very much. But our trajectory today on this planet puts us in a position where we could very well be in the situation we are in this book. So it's post climate disaster or cataclysmic disaster. And so I'm describing how populations are moving toward the poles, how the Amazon basin has basically turned into a desert, sluggish, muddy water, and it's pretty arid. The damage has been done to, say, all the Pacific Islands that are atolls that are underwater, and those sorts of things. And then the migration pressure of populations moving into more temperate areas, which are north. In the northern hemisphere, you have most of the landmass, so they're moving into Canada, Siberia, North Europe, Iceland, Greenland, and Antarctica. The southern hemisphere, South America is the only continent that pushes close to Antarctica. All of the other southern hemisphere land masses are fairly close to the equator. So there's going to be a lot of disruption in population. And how are we going to get through that?
So yeah, a lot of
yeah.
Yeah, so it does focus on that, that particular part of that, how that migration could look, what could happen, how that would work from a sociological standpoint and all of those things, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, now that's exciting. And look, if you love science, I think personally, this is going to be a great read for you. Both the previous Islands in the Void, but now Outbound Meta Mars. Now, Richard, if they want to get a hold of, and I'm sure many will want to read your book after listening to this, how is the best way to go about? How do you want them to do it? Do you want them to go to Amazon? Do you want them to go somewhere else, to your website? Where do we go?
Yeah, Amazon is good. You can order through my website as well. And I don't know, I haven't talked to my publisher, but we could set up some pre-sales on MetaMars. That book looks into robotics, artificial intelligence a lot. The limitations posed by reduced gravity on Mars and on the Moon, and how would we resolve those issues? How would we support a population when you're talking? You have to support an ecology, not all men.
Right. So, what is your website, Richard?
Richard Anderson. Oh, geez, I never go there.
You don't have to visit your own sites. You know what you're thinking, I'm sure.
I should be checking on there all the time. It's I've got it there. I got to set up a spreadsheet with all of my passwords and everything. It's Facebook. It's Richard Anderson, author. The website is Richard M Anderson. No, that's not it.
About richardandersonauthor.com.
AndersonAuthor.com.
Yeah, I found it there. richardandersonauthor.com. You got to be so many places these days. It's hard to keep up with all of them, isn't it?
I know. I should have that all.
No, listen, I understand completely. So you can go to richardandersonauthor.com, or if you just like, you know what, I'm just ready to order it, then go to amazon.com. Now, I did notice on your website, you've done something interesting. I believe you released a portion of a couple of chapters there where people could take a look at it and kind of see a little bit of it before they even purchase it.
That's on MetaMars, yeah. I think the first couple of chapters are on there, and they, I'd have to read them again to see how much they've been revised, but
but it's a good peek into what the coming MetaMars is, and gives you the idea of what's going and a little bit more about that.
Exactly.
All right, outstanding. Well, Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Really exciting to have you on, and I'm looking forward to seeing Outbound Meta Mars and seeing what else you do. And I hope that as you continue, when you put that out and put out other books, that you'll come back and talk to us some more about it.
I'd love it.
All right.
Very much.
Well, there you go, people. Richard Anderson, thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
All right, man.